Here we go. Whoa. Whoa. What is happening? All right, well, yeah, look at that. What a night. We're almost ready. Does that sound okay out there to you? Okay, sounds all right. All right, well, here we are. Sorry for the kind of weird delay. We had, obviously, a little battery problem, and I was looking here on the stream to make sure that people who are on here, they're just watching me talk with no sound because they're delayed. That'll be fun for them. We're going to jump right in. First of all, glad to see you again. Sorry we had to delay this class yet another Wednesday, but Texas weather has a mind of its own, and we decided to cut classes last week, and I think it was the right move. It got pretty nasty that Wednesday night. Ended up being pretty okay the next day, but definitely didn't want to take too many chances. And hopefully, fingers crossed, doesn't happen again. We're so close to finishing this class. I can taste it. It's right there, but we still have actually some big things to talk about tonight. I have low hopes of getting through this handout, but we're going to do our best to make it happen. Before we jump in, I'm trying to think of things that we can announce to you. So first of all, ladies, Women's Exchange Conference this Friday. Friday and Saturday. It is going to be amazing. We have nearly 150 women signed up, which is really, really incredible. It is going to be an absolutely fantastic time together. Guest speaker, guest worship team, some really great door prizes, all kinds of wonderful things. It's not too late still to join. You can sign up on the Church Center app. You can sign up in the foyer. You can call the church office. Honestly, you can probably show up the day of and bring guests, and we'll get them registered. Not a problem at all. Sunday, we're going to be hosting our Newcomers Lunch. And so if you know people who are newer to the church or have never joined the church and have questions and want to sit down and ask those questions over food, I'll be there. I'll be there to answer those questions, and I'll obviously partake in the food as well. And so we're going to have a great time. So highly encourage you to invite anyone you know that might be interested in that yourself. If you've never joined and want to take steps towards that, we would love to have you. That's after second service. We do have a baptism Sunday, and so excited to celebrate that. We are going to continue in our Under the Influence series with yet another influencer who is not Nehemiah or Jeremiah. We talked about Jeremiah last Sunday, and so I'm not going to tell you who. You'll have to show up and find out for yourselves, but it's going to be good. I'm excited. I've been in it all week. Spring breakout. If you have youth, that's going down as well. We need to have them signed up by the 10th. So that's just a FYI. The places that they're going and the things that they're doing require some advance, and so kids can come and sign up after the 10th. They're going to have to just sit there, which would be kind of boring. So get them signed up. Love to have them. You will not regret it. Let's jump in. So we have in front of us today. Last time we met 2 weeks ago, we finished Jeremiah, and we talked through some of my more favorite parts of that book, namely the part at the end in 36 where we learn more or less how Jeremiah was written. It was written at the dictation of Jeremiah through his scribe Baruch. And the version of Jeremiah that we have in our Bibles is actually the second edition of Jeremiah, because the first edition was read and then line by line cut apart and burned by the evil king Jehoiakim. And so Jeremiah received the words again from God, and many similar words were added to them, and the version that we have now is that sort of second version that was put together. Today, we're going to begin with a book that we know as Lamentations. And the author of Lamentations is also Jeremiah. This is more or less Jeremiah's journal, if you will, his prayer journal, if you want to be really relevant and use churchy terms. He records a lot of his own thoughts and feelings and concerns regarding the destruction of Jerusalem by Babylon. So we're going to jump in tonight, and we'll start there. We will certainly get to Daniel. It won't take us too long to get through Lamentations. Daniel's got some weighty stuff in it, and if we make it through Daniel, then we will begin Ezekiel. The chances of getting through Ezekiel, I'm just going to say, pretty low chances. But hey, we can hope and we can pray, and we'll see what happens. Lamentations. So, a couple unique features about it. Number one is that it is written in acrostic form. It uses something called chiasm. I've talked about that in here before. Chiasm is a kind of a way of structuring Jewish literature, and there's a specific physical pattern to the lines as they are written in. And so, the purpose of chiasm is it's to highlight certain aspects of whatever it is you're reading. So the example I always give is Genesis chapter 1. The days of creation are written chiastically, meaning that there are corresponding lines or corresponding segments to one another that lead you to a central focal point, right? So in Genesis, in the first creation account, you have the day one where God gives light. He says, let there be light. There's light. There is water, and that's all you get. Day 4, you get the light makers in the sky, the stars, the sun, and the moon. So light in day 1, the things that actually create light for the future in day 4. And then you have in day 2, God sets the sky, he sets the sea in motion, and in day 5, you get the air-dwelling creatures and the sea-dwelling creatures. In day 3, he separates the land from the water with vegetation. In day 6, he creates all of the land-dwelling creatures, including humans. So there's chiasm, right? Days 1 and 4 connect. Days 2 and 5 connect. Days 3 and 6 connect. And that leaves the reader wondering, what about day 7? Right? Day 7 is sort of left out on its own on an island. And when you read, what you find out is that day 7 is actually perhaps the most significant day of creation because it's the day that God rests. And it's upon him resting that the Sabbath is established, and it becomes the central, most important part of the Jewish tradition. So, chiasm is a way of structuring the literature in order to point the reader to something that they intend to emphasize. And it's not always done that way. Sometimes there's the Babel story in Genesis is also this way, where the beginning of that chapter and the end of that chapter correspond, and the second verse and the second to last verse correspond, and the third verse and the third to last, and it goes all the way to this central point. And so there's a sort of central point in the middle of the book that the author is trying to direct you to. Chiasm is a structural way of sort of showing you some important things. As it happens, Lamentations is written this way. So chapters 1 and 2 are written in an ABC form. Chapter 3 is an AAA, BBB, CCC form. I know this doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to you. If I were showing it to you, maybe it would. And really, you're not going to be tested over it, so it's fine. But it's just important for you to understand that this is one of those books that has very intentional, structural purpose to it, is all I will say. How about that? That's good. I could have said that from the beginning, saved you a lot of trouble. Let's look at the context of Lamentations so that you can understand why or what it is that Jeremiah is saying. So if you go to 2 Kings 25, this sort of sets up the context for what is happening that leads Jeremiah to write the book of Lamentations. 2 Kings 25, verse 1, it says, "In the 9th year of his reign, in the 10th month, on the 10th day of the month, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came with all of his army against Jerusalem and laid siege to it. And they built siege works all around it, and so the city was besieged till the 11th year of King Zedekiah. On the 9th day of the 4th month, the famine was so severe in the city that there was no food for the people of the land, and a breach was made in the city, and all the men of war fled by night by way of the gate between the two walls by the king's garden, and the Chaldeans were around the city, and they were in the direction of Arabah. But the army of the Chaldeans pursued the king and overtook him in the plains of Jericho, and all of his army was scattered before him." It goes on. I'm not going to read the whole chapter, but 25, more or less, gives you the context for which Lamentations is written, which is this, that Jerusalem was sieged by Babylon and laid to waste. Temple is destroyed, the king everyone is taken in captivity, and things look very bleak for Jerusalem. Now, on Sunday mornings, it's funny how the Holy Spirit always works these things together. We're not this smart to plan this stuff together. We're certainly not this, I'm not this organized, I don't think, to put this together. But right now on Sunday mornings, this is the very thing we're talking about, right? Nehemiah, we've gone through this. We're going to do it again on Sunday. I'm going to give you the 3 phases. You're going to hopefully have it memorized by the time we're done with the series. It's going to be very repetitive to me. Maybe it's not to you. Hopefully it's not to you. But if you remember, Jeremiah prophesied that all this stuff was going to happen. 70 years of captivity. Babylon's coming. You're going to be in prison for 70 years. Build houses, plant gardens, have families. You're going to be there a while. And then after 70 years, God is going to bring you back into the land. It happens in these 3 phases. Zerubbabel with the temple, Ezra with the law, Nehemiah with the wall. All of that is the sort of, it's moving us in the direction of this ultimate sort of reestablishing God's people in the land. And it takes a lot of time. But they're all doing this. Zerubbabel, Ezra, Nehemiah, all of them are having to do all this work because of what happens in 2 Kings 25. Because Jerusalem is destroyed and things get very bad. There's famine. They eventually get in. The men flee. And it's all over. It's a horrible thing. So Lamentations, Jeremiah is reflecting then on the reality that this has happened. Jeremiah knew it was going to happen. Okay? He prophesied that it was going to happen. He's a prophet of God. He knew it was going to happen. But I think this brings up an interesting point. That there are things in life that you know are going to happen. And you can be prepared for them all you want. And truly, I mean, be convinced. And I mean, I suppose death is probably one of those things. You know, this is not in my notes at all. I'm just kind of thinking here. When you know someone is going to die, you can be as prepared for that as possible. But when it happens, it's still just as horrible, right? It's still just as awful. And I think that's what Lamentations really reflects. Because Jeremiah knew, I mean, there was no doubt in his mind that God was going to do what he said he was going to do. Jerusalem's going to fall. Babylon is going to overtake you. You're going to go into captivity for a long time. He was aware of all that. But Lamentations still reflects the nature of how difficult this was for him. That though he understood it was going to happen, though he had no doubts in his mind, it was still devastating to him, the reality of it, when it actually took place. Let's take a look. Lamentations chapter 1, verses, 1 through 4. Let me get there, sorry. I could have probably slowed down while I was flipping. Should have marked it. We're almost there. Wait for it. It's like an old internet page loading. Here we go. Lamentations 1 through 4. How lonely sits the city that was full of people. How like a widow she has become. She who was great among the nations, she who was a princess among the provinces, has become a slave. She weeps bitterly in the night with tears on her cheeks. Among all her lovers, she has none to comfort her. All her friends have dealt treacherously with her. They have become her enemies. Judah has gone into exile because of affliction and hard servitude. She dwells now among the nations, but finds no resting place. Her pursuers have all overtaken her in the midst of her distress. The roads to Zion mourn, for none come to the festival. All her gates are desolate. Her priests groan. Real fast, that gates are desolate. This is exactly what Nehemiah is reported, right? Hanani comes back from Jerusalem. This is a century later almost. And he comes back and says, what? That the walls have been turned to rubble and that the gates have been burned. In Lamentations, Jeremiah told us that was the case. He didn't even have to get to Jerusalem to find that out. All he had to do was read Lamentations. Jeremiah told us the state of the gates of the city. Her virgins have been afflicted, and she herself suffers bitterly. Her foes become the head, her enemies prosper. Why? Because the Lord has afflicted her. For the multitude of her transgressions, her children have gone away, captives before the foe. That's an important line. Why did Jerusalem fall? Because God afflicted them. Not because Babylon was great, not because Nebuchadnezzar was a military genius, not because of the famine, not because of anything other than the fact that God afflicted them. Why? Because of their sin. Because he told them over and over and over again through the prophets that they rejected. This is going to happen if you don't repent. And they didn't repent. And so God, as a loving father, is allowing discipline to take place to his child. And it's a hard lesson. It's a hard one. It's a devastating one. But it's a necessary one. So this is Judah's destruction. Judah is laid waste. Notice that it says all of her friends have dealt treacherously with her, some of which were the Edomites. Remember, we talked about that in Obadiah. The mountain-dwelling people, the descendants of Esau, were some of the ones that came down and laid siege to these people in their vulnerability. So that's not very cool. Questions on that one? Lamentations 2. This next part, little graphic. Just going to brace you up front. Pretty rough. Again, not things you're going to find on a coffee cup at Mardell. I'm going to be perfectly honest with you. Not going to happen. Oh, look, O Lord, and see, with whom have you dealt thus? Should women eat the fruit of their womb, the children of their tender care? Should priest and prophet be killed in the sanctuary of the Lord? In the dust of the streets lie the young and the old. My young women and my young men have fallen by the sword. You have killed them in the day of your anger, slaughtering without pity. Now, most of that is like pretty easy to stomach. I mean, it just seems like a war movie. It's the part about the women eating their children that is particularly gruesome. And I want to suggest to you that there is some backstory to this. So this is this is one of the things that was actually predicted would happen to them if they violated the covenant with God. So in Deuteronomy 28, let's go back there. I know it's been a while since we've been in Deuteronomy. This is, kind of tracking all the way back to the first few weeks of this class, which has now been well over 30 weeks, I think, ago that we started, because we're in, session 26, and we've definitely had a few weeks off. So it's been a long time since we've been through Deuteronomy. But if you remember, one of the things I talked about in Deuteronomy is that the covenant agreement between God and Israel during this time could be likened to a type of document, an ancient document in this Middle Eastern part of the world for this time, known as a suzerain vassal treaty. The suzerain vassal treaty was it was a mutually beneficial treaty between a larger nation and a smaller nation, where the larger nation became the suzerain. They held suzerainty over this other smaller nation who became their vassal. And the way it would work is the larger suzerain nation would give security, they would give protection, they would give supplies, they would have all kinds of economic and military benefits. And in exchange for those things, the vassal had to be prepared to fight on behalf of the suzerain if war demanded it. So if war happens and this suzerain is calling up arms, the vassals rally as well, and they come to aid. Otherwise, they violate the terms of the covenant, and the suzerain dominates and destroys the vassal, right? The covenant that God makes with Israel could be likened to that. It never uses that terminology in Deuteronomy, but when you analyze the way the covenant is unfolded, it has all of the key elements that we would expect in a suzerain vassal treaty. People with way more knowledge of ancient Jewish literature and history and Old Testament scholarship figured this stuff out. But it's right on the money. It's really amazing when you look at the analysis between the two. One of the parts of this contract or covenant is that there are blessings if you uphold the covenant, and there are curses if you do not uphold the covenant. If you break covenant, then curses are enacted upon the person who is breaking the covenant. And chapter 28 talks about some of those curses. That gives description of what's going to happen if Israel doesn't hold up their end of the bargain. What was their end of the bargain? Don't commit idolatry, don't intermarry. Pretty simple. No sexual immorality as well. They struck out on every single one of those, and badly. And so we get into Deuteronomy 28. Look at verse 52. They shall besiege you in all of your towns until your high and fortified walls in which you trusted come down throughout all your land. And they shall besiege you in all your towns throughout all your land which the Lord has given you. And you, look at this, shall eat the fruit of your womb, the flesh of your sons and daughters, whom the Lord your God has given you in the siege and in distress with which your enemies shall distress you. You will be under such siege and such famine that you will begin eating your kids. That's what God says to them. And Jeremiah says, yep, he wasn't wrong. It's exactly what happened. Lamentations 2:20. Put it on a coffee cup. There's one other place where it talks about this. So Jeremiah himself actually talks about this. Jeremiah 19:9. He speaks to this exact same thing. Let me get there. Hold on. 19:9. I'll start in 8. And I will make the city a horror, a thing to be hissed at. Everyone who passes by it will be horrified and will hiss because of all of its wounds. And I will make them eat the flesh of their sons and their daughters, and everyone shall eat the flesh of his neighbor in the siege and in the distress with which their enemies and those who seek their life afflict them. So, Lamentations 2:20, horrible reality, a predictable reality, one that God said was going to happen, at least twice. Now, why do I bring this up? I bring it up for two reasons. One, because it's a part of Jewish history that we need to understand. We need to get it. We need to understand, if we're going to understand why Jeremiah was raised up as a prophet, and why is the book of Lamentations in the Bible? Why do we have that in there? If we're going to understand that, we need to know, first of all, what it says. And these are the kinds of verses you're not going to probably see in many places. I say it jokingly about coffee cups, but most churches aren't teaching Lamentations 2:20 because it's not something that people want to hear. I think it's something we need to hear. I think it's something we need to hear for a couple of reasons. One, because we have this sort of baptized view of the Bible that it's just all these like moralistic good stories. It's not. There's some really hard stories in the Bible. There's some really brutal stories in the Bible. We need to hear those stories because we live in a life and in a world where brutal things happen every day. And it's really difficult to make sense of a world where these things happen if your view of what the world should look like and how God governs it is all just fun, cute little stories. But if you understand that from the beginning of time, God has sovereignly reigned over a world that included cannibalism of children, burning of children, throwing children off of cliffs onto rocks for sport, then all of a sudden the world becomes a much more relatable place biblically as well. And I say that because in this conversation, as horrible and as dark as it really is, we get to Lamentations chapter 3. And perhaps one of the most beautiful verses in the Old Testament. Look at verse 31 and 32. Wait, is that right? 31 through 33. It says, "For the Lord will not cast off forever, but though he causes grief, he will have compassion according to the abundance of his steadfast love. For he does not afflict from his heart or grieve the children of men, to crush underfoot and all the prisoners of the earth, to deny a man justice in the presence of the Most High, to subvert a man in his lawsuit. The Lord does not approve." In other words, God is going to still have compassion. There's still going to be hope. Look at what I was thinking of actually was that's the latter part of it. Look at verses 20, starting in 20. "My soul continually remembers it and is bowed down within me. But I call this to mind, and therefore I have hope." How do you have hope in a world where kids are eaten? Here it is. "The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never come to an end. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. The Lord is my portion, says my soul. Therefore I will hope in him." So the world is this dark place. It's this awful place. Unthinkably bad things happen. But Jeremiah says, this is how I find hope. I remember that God's steadfast love endures and that every single day is a new day for his mercy. That's hopeful. Yeah. 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 It's true. It's true. And when you read one of the things that actually, it's crazy how the Holy Spirit orchestrates these things, because I had not even looked at my notes earlier when I was writing the Bible study for week 5, which is being handed out Sunday. It's almost done. I hadn't even looked at this tonight. I couldn't remember where we were. I just hadn't thought about it at all. And so it's funny to me that Thomas Obadiah Chiasm, name that probably none of you are familiar with, man that was born in I think 1863, 1866, something like that, somewhere in Franklin, Kentucky, came to faith at 27. 10 years later was ordained. 20 years after that, at the age of 57, he, after writing poetry for a long time, partnered up with another guy in the church that he was serving in named Runyon, last name Runyon, and they together composed a poem that Chiasm had written, a reflection of Lamentations 3:20 through 22, and he penned the hymn, "Great is Thy Faithfulness." It's one of my most favorite songs from that time frame, one that we've done here, and it's exactly what he says. Great is Thy faithfulness. Morning by morning, new mercies I see. I mean, it's beautiful. Here's the tragedy, is that if you don't read things like Lamentations 2:20, like you were saying, then God's mercies are just not as beautiful and warranted. Again, if my view of life is just that, it's mostly just this kind of good life, or on the, really bad side, if I buy into more of a health and wealth, prosperity perspective, and I think that God should always just be raining blessings on me, and that I should always have the best job, and I should always have the best whatever, the moment something bad happens, I have no real way to reckon with it. And when someone talks about the mercy of God, new mercies every morning, and great is Thy faithfulness, and the steadfast love of the Lord endures, how much more magnified is it with the ugly backdrop of the context of Lamentations 2? It becomes far more beautiful. It becomes far more beautiful. You don't realize how beautiful the promises of God are until they're pushed up against the backdrop of how desperately wicked sin really is. And when you see that, and then the gospel appears, all of a sudden it makes sense why people would die for it. It makes sense why people have been martyred for it through the years. Because it's the only thing that helps us make sense of all the bad things that happen. Passages like Lamentations chapter 2. When I see Bible stories made into movies, I hard eye roll, because I know it's going to probably be terrible. And B, I hard eye roll if it's not rated R. Because unless it's a select couple of stories, it's not being done justice then. Because these stories, I would contend, if they were being made into a movie, would have to be rated R in order to fully depict what was going on. Just my perspective. What was Passion of the Christ rated? Yeah. Case in point. Best biblical movie that's been made. Apart from some of the weird little Satan baby things that they do, highly influenced by Roman Catholicism, it is a tremendous, tremendous depiction of what more than likely took place. And it is hard to watch, is it not? And listen, it should be hard to watch. If you watch it and you're like, then it didn't do its job. It didn't do its job. Crucifixion is ugly. There's a reason it was given to the worst criminals on the planet. It was not supposed to be pretty. It was not supposed to be quick. It was supposed to make you go, whatever he did, I want to make sure on my life I never get close to it. Because I don't want that to happen. That was the point. That's why it was public. That's why it was very visual. Any questions? Let me throw you the box. I forgot on the first one. Here you go.
Yeah, I just had a question about, so the Jews at this time, does that mean that all of the Jews were sinning and not following the commandments and
Right.
the commands of God?
It means that overwhelmingly, yes. There were probably some that were, I'm sure, I mean, there's always a remnant. But by this point, so after Manasseh, if you remember the Judah kings, Manasseh's the one that really does a number, and things get very bad after his reign. And even after his reign, you get one more really great king after that. But it doesn't matter. God's like, it's over with. It's coming. It's happening. Get ready. Batten down the hatches because it's not going to be good. And so, I think that by this point, typically the way of the king was the way of the people. And they had so many bad kings that were doing so many bad things that it was overwhelmingly, not a good place to be. Yeah. Other questions, thoughts? Yeah, toss that over to Miss Marcella. Yeah.
Pastor, so, they talk about the terrible things that are happening with the sin because they're terrible sin. That even if we don't see right now, it's the same terrible thing that happen in some places right now. And Paul talked in Galatas about the same curse. But they're not specific, the terrible thing that the Lord can make. And I was hearing something in the radio, and they say, about Paul, is that because Paul saying Galatians?
Is there any way you can make that not ring as much, Kelsey? There's a lot of ringing up here that I'm hearing, and I'm having a hard time hearing anything.
Well, my English is not very well.
Let me come over this way. Say again.
No, in Galatians, Galatians,
mm-hmm.
Yes, when Paul say, curse the men who don't follow the law.
Right.
Okay. In Lamentation, they say the Lord make all these things that happen to the people as a curse, So, but people say that because we have now Jesus Christ, that is true, say the new covenant, men cannot be cursed.
Yeah, so that's a good question. So you're asking about the connection between curse language in Galatians versus Deuteronomy 28. Yes. So the primary difference there is that in Deuteronomy 28, this is a specific covenant made with the nation of Israel. The kind of curse language that Paul is talking about there's a couple of different passages. So you have in what is it, Galatians 1:8, I think, where it talks about let him be accursed. Is that right? I can't remember. It's been a while, actually, since I have studied through Galatians, now that I think about it. I think it's Galatians 1:8, though, if I'm not. Yeah, but even if we or an angel from heaven should preach to you a gospel contrary to the one we've preached to you, let him be accursed. It's a word, it's an anathema. Let him be damned. Let him go to hell, is what he's saying. Condemned. It's that kind of terminology there. It's not necessarily the same thing as what Deuteronomy 28 is suggesting. It's actually far worse than Deuteronomy 28 because it has eternal implications, right? In Galatians, where is that? At the end, like you said, there is one other passage that deals with that language. But again, the kind of concept of being under a curse of the law is really more of a figure of speech. It's not talking about a literal curse in the same way that Deuteronomy 28 is. The reason we know that is because in Deuteronomy 28, it spells out the recipients of the covenant, which are the nation of Israel, and it spells out the curses that's going to fall on them if they break the covenant. We don't get that in here. In fact, we get in Romans, there is therefore now no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. So Paul's point in Galatians 1:8 at least is anyone who proclaims a gospel contrary to the gospel, let him be condemned, right? What's interesting, and I will say no more than this, no rabbit trails, is he says, if anyone, even we or an angel of the Lord, right? That's curious language. Now, in the New Testament, we get angel of the Lord coming to people and giving messages. Luke, for example, Gabriel comes to both Mary and Elizabeth, actually Mary and Zechariah. And so you see these sort of visitations take place. The interesting thing about it is that one of the most predominant religions tied to Christianity that distinctively and unapologetically proclaims a different gospel than the one true faith is Mormonism, and they claim they got it from an angel of the Lord, Moroni. So it is a little, it's always struck me as a little ironic, Galatians 1:8, that Paul would say that, because it's quite literally the central hub of the Latter-day Saint religion. Yeah, go ahead and give it that. Yeah.
Good.
Oh, right here, box.
Scream.
We'll try.
Doesn't Islam, isn't that closer to Christianity as far as the way they believe about the structure and stuff?
Isn't Islam closer
Yeah,
than Mormonism?
yeah.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, no doubt about
I
it.
mean, I know they don't believe in the Trinity, but they believe they're
Yeah.
polytheistic.
Yeah, so Islam is an Abrahamic religion, right? So it has Abraham as its central figure. One of the big differences between Islam and Christianity is actually in the Abrahamic tradition, where they think that Ishmael was the heir to the covenant and not Isaac. And interestingly, if you look historically at where Ishmael goes after he's cast aside, he ends up in somewhere near Arabia, which is, there's no question that those things are put together for a reason. And so, yeah, you do have the Quran, which is their own. They don't read the Bible; they have their own book that they study. But many of the stories are very similar. You have a lot of the same figures. Isa, one of the greatest prophets of Islam, who is their Jesus, but he's not divine. Obviously, myriad of things wrong with Islam, but in terms of how close to is it Christianity versus Mormonism, in a lot of ways, at least from the more ancient Near Eastern perspectives, it's a lot more close than Mormonism. Mormonism freaks me out. I'll just be honest with you. It is a terrifying religion. The more I study about it, the more I know people who have come out of it, the more I'm convinced there is more spiritual oppression within that religious movement than probably any other religious tradition in America. It is the poster child for whitewashed tombs. You have to look the part. It is a part of their culture through and through. And there are all kinds of bad things going on in the inner sanctum of that faith tradition. And I know, guys, if you were here during my cults class and you were able to hear Dr. Kearns teach on Mormonism, you heard him talk a little bit about some of the things that Mormons believe that are not as highly advertised. Kearns was a missionary to Salt Lake for about 6 years. And the things that man has seen and experienced it's remarkable. It's remarkable. The things that go on in that temple, it's terrifying. There's a reason why Paul says what he says there in Galatians. But all that to say, different curse than Deuteronomy 28. So, good question. You got a question?
As we look in the modern times and with hindsight, we look at Israel, we look at the apostle or the disciples who became the apostles, and think, why do they not see what they're doing? Their eyes were not open to this.
Yep.
Is it the fact that God said that He will write His words on our hearts? And the fact that we have the Holy Spirit indwelling us, not just coming upon us for select things, but there still was a remnant that was good and faithful. And I guess my question is, how do you explain those that are good and faithful in light of the fact that they don't even have the Holy Spirit and they don't have God's Word in their heart?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think that there are people that God calls and raises up, first of all. So Jeremiah being one of them, called before the womb, right, as a prophet. God had a purpose and a plan for him for that. There is still the law not written on our hearts, but written down. I mean, this is the central problem of so much of the rebellion that takes place in all of Jewish history. The moment they begin to divert from the law, things go badly for them. Joshua takes one generation after, when the children do not learn the law, and then we enter Judges. And everyone did what was right in their own eyes, because they didn't know the law. It wasn't in front of them. They didn't follow the Shema, right? Deuteronomy 6. Bind it on your doorpost. Write it everywhere. Make it to where everywhere you go and everything you do, you're talking about this stuff. Joshua 1:8. Don't let the law depart from your mouth, but meditate on it day and night. If you do that, then he says what's going to happen. Your way is going to be made prosperous. Things are going to go well for you. When you don't, things go poorly for you. Psalm 1, blessed is the one who does not walk in the way of sinners or stand in the way of, right? But the one who, his delight is in the law of the Lord. That it always comes back to that. There's always this connection to the law. So, okay, I wasn't going to tell you guys, but y'all are my class, and so whatever. So Sunday we're going to be talking about this very thing. We're going to go back into the phase 2 of Israel's re-involvement or going back to the land, and we're going to talk about Ezra. Ezra was a man of the word. He was an influencer who was himself influenced by the word of God. And he set his heart to study it, to do it, and to teach others about it. And this is the central reason why there's revival in Jerusalem. It's why when Nehemiah comes back and rebuilds the wall in chapter 8, after everything is done, Ezra, who's still alive, stands up and reads the law, and the people repent. And there is mass revival in the land. Why? Not because the Spirit fell on them in the traditional way that we think of it now, but the Spirit fell on them in that the law was proclaimed and they heard and they understood. So it's much easier for us now. We complain all the time. Man, Christians have it the easiest out of everybody. We know God the deepest. We understand the fullness of his prophetic, for the most part, with regard to the second coming. But, everything else is clear to us. We get the significance of it all. He's given us a helper. He's given us everything that we need through the Spirit. Gifts, community, fellowship, the whole 9 yards. Clear instruction from the apostles' teaching. And we still struggle. Yeah. Good question. Did that answer it? Cool. All right. Let's move to Daniel. Daniel. So Daniel is, I think I told you guys we were going to do this. I will remind you guys tonight before we jump into it, lest I disappoint you, because I wouldn't want to do that. We're not even going to look at Daniel 1 through 6, right? We just preached on Daniel within the last year. I don't remember when that was, but these are 1 through, so this is how it works. Preachers, when they do a Bible study or a sermon series through the book of Daniel, usually it's Daniel 1 through 6. We conveniently forget about 7 and on, because 7 and on feels like an acid trip. It feels really weird. There's some bizarre things that take place. I was in a men's group that reminds me of, this is of no bearing on our discussion tonight, but it's funny. So I'm going to tell you, I was in a men's group Tuesday morning, and someone said something about, I remember in the 60s when, da-da-da-da-da, and they were sharing their story, and the guy next to me leaned over and he goes, if he remembers the 60s, he didn't live in them. And I said, it's probably pretty true, actually. Yeah, Daniel gets very weird. So here's what we're going to do. We're not going to cover 1 through 6, because you're going to hear 1 through 6 every time anyone preaches through Daniel. We're going to start in chapter 7 and talk about when things start to get a little weirder. And there are some things in here that are actually, I think, really pretty profound, pretty incredible indeed. So Daniel We'll start with 7, verse 9. Daniel 7, verse 9. Actually, I got this circled. This isn't in my notes, but I'm going to talk about it anyway. I saw in my vision, this is verse 2. Daniel declared, I saw in my vision by night, and behold, the four winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea. All I'm going to say is just hold on to that phrasing, okay? That's going to come up again in another prophetic book, and then I'll explain the significance there, but just want to point that out. Look at verse 9. As I looked, thrones were placed, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. His clothing was white as snow, and the hair of his head like pure wool. His throne was fiery flames. Its wheels were burning fire. A stream of fire issued and came out from before him. 1,000 thousands served him, and 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The court sat in judgment, and the books were opened. So just first of all, can we acknowledge the epicness of this passage? Second of all, can we acknowledge that the throne that the Ancient of Days is sitting on has flaming wheels? That's just awesome. I don't even know, what is the point of flaming wheels on your throne? It doesn't even matter. Put them on the throne if you can. If you have it, do it, right? That's completely cool. Now, while we're here, turn to everyone's favorite, Revelation chapter 1. Revelation chapter 1. Holding in mind what we just read, look at verses 12 through 16. Then I turned to see the voice that was speaking to me. This is John speaking. And on turning, I saw 7 golden lampstands, and in the midst of the lampstands, one like a son of man, clothed with a long robe and a golden sash around his chest. The hairs of his head were white, like wool, like snow. His eyes were like a flame. His feet were like burnished bronze refined in a furnace, and his voice was like the roar of many waters. And in his right hand he held 7 stars, and from his mouth came a sharp 2-edged sword, and his face was like the sun shining in full strength. And when I saw him, I fell at his feet as though dead. But he laid his right hand on me and said, Fear not, I am the first and the last and the living one. I died, and behold, I am alive forevermore. I have the keys of death and Hades. We see some similarities here, do we not? Between the Ancient of Days, who has hair like wool, who from him, before him, streams of fire. You could think of that as the sun shining. Fire, sun, star. Burnished bronze, a furnace. So we're getting a picture of maybe who this Ancient of Days character is. But if we're not convinced, let's keep reading. There's more about this. Look at verse 13. This is Daniel 7 again. I saw in the night visions, and behold, with the clouds of heaven there came one like a son of man. And he came to the Ancient of Days and was presented before him. And to him was given dominion and glory and a kingdom that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion which shall not pass away, and his kingdom one that shall not be destroyed. So, he's not quite the same as the Ancient of Days, but he's very similar. And he presents himself before the Ancient of Days, and the Ancient of Days gives him all of these things: dominion, glory, a kingdom, and a people. Now, again, we're going to look at some other passages just because I think there's some interesting things here that are in need of. His kingdom, one that shall not be destroyed. A dominion that is everlasting, one that will not pass away. If you look at 2 Samuel chapter 7, we're going to learn what the promises of the Davidic king are going to look like. This is Nathan speaking to David at this point. Let's see here, where is it? 2 Samuel 7, 12. Come on, Bible. Cooperate with me. Wow. There we go. 2 Samuel 7, starting in verse 12. When your days are fulfilled and you lie down with your fathers, I will raise up your offspring after you, who shall come from your body, and I will establish his kingdom. He's talking to David. When you die, one day, one of your offspring are going to be raised up by God, and I'm going to establish his kingdom. He shall build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. I will be to him a father, and he will be to me a son. So this is talking about David here, by the way, right? David and Solomon, really. There's a connection between the two. Davidic kings, Solomon's going to be the one that builds God a house. But look at what he says down here in verse 16. And your house and your kingdom shall be made sure forever before me. Your throne will be established forever. The word in Hebrew there, it means forever. Never ending. So this figure who is gone before the Ancient of Days in Daniel 7 is given by God glory, dominion, a kingdom, and his kingdom is one that will never be destroyed. It will last forever. Pretty interesting, isn't it? Now, beyond this, there are allusions in the New Testament that Jesus just explicitly connects himself to this. So if we were playing a game right now of Jesus, not Jesus, or Jesus and not Jesus, this would be Jesus. Yeah, there ain't anyone else fulfilling this one. This is only Jesus. And what does he say? And it happens in Mark, it happens in Matthew, where he says, you will see me coming on the clouds with fire. You will see the Son of Man. He even refers to himself in one of the versions. You will see the Son of Man coming with the clouds of fire. Who does that? This guy. He's just unapologetic about it. Yeah, I'm him. It's me. It's Tony Stark at the end of Iron Man 1. I'm Iron Man. Right? Blows everyone's mind. Jesus was saying this the whole time. I'm him. I'm the one. People still couldn't believe it. They couldn't get their minds around it. Questions on that? All right, Daniel 8. We get even more weird. So Daniel 8 consists of a very, very strange vision. And I'm not going to go a lot into the history tonight because we don't have time, and it would probably more than anything bore you trying to put all the nations together. I'm going to connect one figure very importantly to Jewish history that I've referred to a couple of times, and it starts in Daniel 8. So Daniel 8, you get a vision of Daniel. It begins with he says, I raised up, this is verse 3, I raised my eyes and saw, behold, a ram standing on the bank of the canal. It had two horns, and both horns were high, but one was higher than the other. And the higher one came up last. I saw the ram charging westward and northward and southward. No beast could stand before him, and there was no one who could rescue from his power. He did as he pleased and became great. And as I was considering, behold, a male goat came from across the west, across the face of the whole earth without touching the ground. And the goat had a conspicuous horn between his eyes. And he came to the ram with the two horns, which I had seen standing on the bank of the canal, and he ran at him in his powerful wrath. And I saw him come close to the ram, and he was enraged against him, and struck the ram, and broke his two horns, and the ram had no power to stand before him. But he cast him down to the ground and trampled him, and there was no one who could rescue the ram from his power. And then the goat became exceedingly great, but when he was strong, a great horn was broken, and instead of it, there came up four conspicuous horns towards the four winds of heaven. There's that four winds of heaven again. We'll talk more about that in a little while. So far, we have an acid trip happening. I told you, as promised, really trippy things, right? Ram, two horns, one's longer than the other. He's terrifying and dominating everyone. And then a goat comes across the world without ever even touching the ground. So it's like a floating goat, I guess, with one horn between his eyes. And he just absolutely mauls this ram. And there's nothing the ram could do. And then his horn breaks, and four more horns sprout up. I mean, you can't make this stuff up, right? This is crazy. Now, it's not crazy. So what happens is the ram represents, and the horns represent two nations that are exceedingly powerful that no one can escape from. Babylon, Persia. Who is the goat? The goat is a Greco-Roman figure. We'll just put it that way. Rome, more than likely. None of this has happened yet. After this collision, four more horns sprout up, and these represent these sort of kingdoms within the Greco-Roman world that all have power at one time, or perhaps even figures leaders in the Greco-Roman world. But we get to this curious verse in verse 9. Out of one of them came a little horn, which grew exceedingly great towards the south, toward the east, and toward the glorious land. It grew great even to the host of heaven, and some of the hosts and some of the stars it threw down to the earth and trampled on them. It became great, even as great as the prince of the host, and the regular burnt offering was taken away from him, and the place of his sanctuary was overthrown. So this is getting into some spiritual warfare now, where his dominance is affecting even the angelic realm, is what's happening. This figure, this little horn figure, when you do all the math and geography, again, I'm not going to do it tonight, we're pretty certain, and by pretty certain, I mean it's pretty regularly accepted, that this is the man known as Antiochus Epiphanes, a Roman governor in the land of Jerusalem that when he came in was horrifically terrorizing to the Jewish people. Overtook the temple, slaughtered pigs on the altar, which are considered unclean, had sexual immorality taking place in the temple, temple prostitutes, the whole 9 yards, desecrated the temple, was horrible to the Jews, would imprison them, would beat them, would kill them. And in Jewish history, you get a individual named Maccabees that raises up a Maccabean revolution. First and Second Maccabees and the Apocrypha record this. We don't include it in the Bible because the Jews didn't include it in the Bible. If it wasn't good enough for them, it's not good enough for us. Come on, Catholics. You know, this is... But all that to say, the Maccabees are important. It's an important historical work. It chronicles some history of things that took place. We don't consider it canon, but as I've said before in this class, we've got to get out of this dualistic way of thinking about ancient books, that if it's not in the Bible, it's not important. That's silly. We don't think that way about any other historical book. You read history of World War II. You read history of the Civil War. You read history of this and that. No one ever goes, well, it's not inspired by God, so this is bullcrap. No, you just accept that, like, it's one person's perspective of something that took place historically, and there were probably other details that weren't included or misremembered or whatever, and that's fine. But the Maccabees tells the story of this revolution that takes place. They run Antiochus Epiphanes out. The land is reclaimed. The Jews have their temple back. They're still under Roman dominion, but by the time you get to Jesus and the New Testament era, that you're seeing the results of that. Rome is still in actual charge, but those high priests have a lot of power, right? And they're the ones that call for the arrest. And if it weren't for the Sabbath, they would have done the thing themselves. They just want to crucify somebody on the Sabbath because it was unlawful for them because they were so religious. So you see how, again, historical books of the Bible in Daniel predict things that take place that are pretty almost certainly what took place right before the time of Christ. Now, I will also say that this is an example of typology. What do I mean by that? Typology is a way of understanding biblical prophecy that presents a near reality, a near fulfillment, Antiochus Epiphanes, and a far fulfillment, something that has not yet taken place. So my conviction is that little horn quite literally was fulfilled in Antiochus Epiphanes, but that typologically will be fulfilled in some greater unknown way near the end. Yeah. Questions on that one? You can see why, Sunday morning, welcome in, great to have you here. Open your Bibles to Daniel 8. I'm about to confuse you for the next 40 minutes. Right? This is why preachers do this. Let's keep moving. Daniel 10. Daniel 10. Man, this is one trippy passage, and it's one of my favorites. We'll start in verse 10. And behold, a hand touched me and set me trembling on my hands and knees. And he said to me, O Daniel, man greatly loved, understand the words that I speak to you and stand upright. For now I have been sent to you. Who is speaking to Daniel? Who has been sent to him to talk to him? We're about to find out. And when he had spoken this word to me, I stood up trembling. And then he said to me, Fear not, Daniel, For from the first day that you set your heart to understand and humbled yourself before God, your words have been heard, and I have come because of your words. The prince of the kingdom of Persia withstood me 21 days, but Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me, for I was left there with the kings of Persia, and came to make you understand what is to happen to your people in the latter days, for the vision is for days yet to come. Still doesn't tell us who he is, but we can almost safely assume he's an angel, because he somehow heard the words of Daniel, presumably his prayers. He's in cahoots with Michael, the archangel. Kind of a big deal, right? Now, if you go back to chapter 8 again, we didn't read all that chapter. There is another angel that appears. His name is Gabriel. And so a lot of scholars, including myself, think that this is probably Gabriel speaking to him. But it doesn't necessarily have to be. It could just be another unnamed angel at this point who is coming on behalf of Daniel to help him. Now, the question becomes, what are we to do with this whole mess with the Prince of Persia and Michael, and why was he being withheld, and what was going on? He wanted to come, he heard Daniel's prayers, he wanted to come and speak to him, but he was held up by this figure named the Prince of Persia, or the Kingdom of Persia. If you remember all the way back, Deuteronomy 32, verse 8. I'm going to go there. You don't have to. You can if you'd like. We talked about a passage in Deuteronomy that includes something called a text variant, where it's a verse that in some transcripts has one word, and in other transcripts it has another word. And depending on the translation that you're reading and what manuscripts they're pulling from to do their translations will determine what your translation says. There's not many of these in the Bible. There are a couple. This is one that I think is most interesting. None of them change like the fabric of theology or anything like that at all. This one definitely shapes a little bit of the way we see it. How many of you have in Deuteronomy 32:8, when the Most High gave to the nations their inheritance, when he divided mankind, he fixed the borders of the peoples according to the number of the sons of men? Anyone? Deuteronomy 32:8. If you're reading the elect standard version, it's the English standard version, but that's what I like to call it, then you get the number of the sons of God. But this is a text variant. I'm sorry, Israel, not sons of men, sons of Israel is what it should say. That's what yours says? Children of Israel. Yeah, okay. So what's going on in this passage? We talked about this a while ago, but I'll you know what, I'm going to grab a stool again. I liked that the other day. It was nice. I'm going to sit down for this part. What we talked about when we did this was that the Masoretic text says the children of Israel, but that the older manuscripts that go much further back, the earliest manuscripts we have of Deuteronomy, say the number of the sons of God. And that the picture that's being presented here is essentially this, that the borders of peoples in the world that God divides, the number of nations, are numbered according to the number of angels. Sons of God in the Old Testament always means angel. So you have a number of angels, and they correspond at least 1-to-1, could be, more than that to one nation, but at least 1-to-1 to every nation. So that what that means is nation A has angel A, and nation B has angel B, and nation C has angel C. And these are sort of these angels that correspond over nations and sort of govern in a supernatural way what is happening in a mirror image on earth. And what it does is it brings out the reality that when there is war, for example, like right now between Russia and Ukraine, it's a good example of this because it's actually happening. There is, according to the Bible, a spiritual reality that is taking place as well. A mirror image in the spirit world that there is also war. This is the concept that the Old Testament drives home. Jesus refers to this when he says, what you bind on earth, you bind in heaven. What you loose on earth, you loose in heaven. There's a connection between the two. There's this unseen realm, and there are things that happen in between the two that are somehow connected to one another. We don't really understand it, but it's there. And so the idea going on here in Daniel chapter 10 is that Daniel was praying and that God dispatched this angel to speak to him, to give him whatever revelation he was supposed to have, but he was withheld because something was going on in Persia that required a conflict that actually required Michael to intervene. That's how bad it got. And whenever Michael intervenes, it's bad. The only other time we see Michael intervening, Revelation 12, when he sucker punches Satan. He doesn't sucker punch him. He's standing right in front of him. He's just stronger. Again, I'm chasing so many rabbit trails right now, but it's worth it. This whole idea that like Satan and God are, like one-to-one enemies is silly. Satan can't even beat Michael, the archangel. God could literally just sit on his throne and do nothing, and Michael could handle it. That's the picture that we get in Revelation 12. And I've said this before, I've said it in my New Testament class as well. When Jesus finally does come to fight Satan, it's not even a fight. And it even says the angels come. It describes what they're wearing. They're not war clothes. Angels didn't come to fight. They come out on their horses and their dress clothes. They're just there for the show. Jesus takes one swing, and they're done. They're gone. Anyway, I could go on that. But yeah, this is what's happening in Daniel. This is kind of a crazy depiction of how angels intervene with earthly stuff. It's kind of cool, though. This is fun. Like, this is, again, why preachers don't preach Daniel chapter 10. Let's see here. We'll do one more here, and then we may have time to start Ezekiel. Any questions on that? There's probably a lot of questions on that, but all right. Daniel 12. Daniel 12, 1 through 4. At that time shall arise Michael, the great prince, who was charge of your people, and there shall be a time of trouble, such as never been seen since there was a nation until that time. But at that time your people shall be delivered, everyone whose name shall be found written in the book. And many of those who sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, and some to shame, and some in everlasting contempt. And those who are wise shall shine like the brightness of the sky above, and those who turn many to righteousness like the stars forever and ever. But you, Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book until the time of the end. Many shall run to and fro, knowledge shall increase. Then I, Daniel, looked, and behold, two others stood, one on this bank of the stream, and one on that bank of the stream. And someone said to the man clothed in linen, who was above the waters of the stream, How long shall it be till the end of these wonders? And I heard the man clothed in linen say, 2022 reasons why Jesus comes in 2020. I'm just kidding. I heard him say, he raised his right hand and his left hand toward heaven and swore by him who lives forever that it would be for a time, times, and half a time. And that when the shattering of the power of the holy people comes to an end, all these things would be finished. I heard, but I did not understand. Then I said, O my Lord, what shall be the outcome of these things? And he said, Go your way, Daniel, for the words are shut up and sealed until the time of the end. Many shall purify themselves and make themselves white and be refined, but the wicked shall act wickedly, and none of the wicked shall understand, but those who are wise shall understand. And from the time that the regular burnt offering is taken away and the abomination that makes desolate is set up, there shall be 1,290 days. Blessed is he who waits and arrives at the 1,335 days. But go your way till the end, and you shall rest and shall stand in your allotted place at the end of the days. So this is kind of the end of things in motion, right? There's going to be trouble. Verse 2, many of those who sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake. This is resurrection. This is why when Jesus speaks to the Sadducees and they talk of resurrection, it says that they laugh at him. They think he's crazy. Why? Because the Sadducees were the sect of Jewish teachers who only read the Torah. They didn't accept the prophets and the writings. You only get resurrection in the prophets and in the writings. You don't get it in the Torah. So they have no concept of this. They're not familiar with Daniel. They're only committed to Torah. Here's what I'll say at the end of this part, and then we'll go early, and we'll come back and we'll do Ezekiel next time because there's some Yeah, that'll be good. A lot of effort has gone into trying to decode times, time, and half a time. And here is what I will leave you with. Daniel is given knowledge and understanding by God to receive the things that he writes down. And when he is asked, or rather when he asks, when is this all going to happen, he doesn't get an answer. And so there's been a lot of like math and, time equals this and times equal that, and half a time equals this, and if we do the math right, then it's going to be on this day or in this thing or in this place or whatever. And we're not meant to know that. You're just not meant to know that. The focal point of the Christian faith should not be when everything gets bad. The focal point of the Christian faith is hope in the midst of already bad. And so when Christians begin spending more of their times trying to figure out what all these things mean so they can decode it, we miss the point. Jesus comes right out and says, not even the Son knows when I'm coming back. Only the Father knows. If Jesus doesn't know, no author of any book in the modern world knows either. I'm pretty confident of that. I'm very confident of that, in fact. And so it's a lot of fun to talk about, and there's a lot of really cool things about it. I do think it's interesting that Daniel is very, very clearly not meant to be read literally. 1,290 days happened a long time ago, right? Times, time, and half a time, clearly figurative. My view on Revelation, if you've heard me teach, is very figurative because I believe it's the way apocalyptic literature is typically written. But if we can be more interested in what the gospel does in the midst of already bad and not as interested in when the bad actually comes, the church will be the bright light we're meant to be. And then it won't matter. And it'll be awesome. People have asked me this week, what's my take on Russia and Ukraine? Is this the end of the world? It could be. I mean, it certainly could be the end of the world. Tom Brady retired, so I mean, it certainly could be. There've been signs all along, right? I mean, I don't know. We've had 2 world wars, and every preacher and theologian said that it was the end times then, and then it wasn't. I'm not too concerned about it. I'm concerned about the gospel and doing what we do here. So we'll come back next time. We will look at Ezekiel. And then I think, if I'm not mistaken, we have Psalms. We've done Isaiah, done Daniel. Yeah. So I think we have Ezekiel and then Psalms, and then we're done. We may spend a little bit of time in Ezekiel and do one more week for Psalms for 2 reasons. One, Ezekiel has some really incredible things in it. There are some talks about Satan, not Satan, or Satan and not Satan. There is some covenantal language. There's some baptismal language. There's some really important stuff in Ezekiel. So what we may do is just focus next time on Ezekiel, and if we get out a little early, we get out a little early again, and then we'll come back, because Psalm, covering the entirety of Psalms in one night is going to be wild. There's a lot of them. And so we're certainly going to just do more bird's eye view. But as it stands, it seems like probably just 2 more weeks, and then we're done with the Old Testament. We may have 2 more snow days in there. I don't really know. It might be another month. Last but not least, if I could get you to help with something. The youth are going to be coming over here in a minute as well. Is that still happening, Kelsey? Okay, yeah, have them go ahead and start coming. Tell them to hurry. We need to get these chairs up and to the sides of the room, and the more people helping, the better, because we have our women's conference in here in 2 days, and they're going to set tables up. So we appreciate you. God bless you. Yeah, we'll stack them up and just put them against the wall. 4, 5, 5, 6, yeah.